Good morning, you're watching World News and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. On Wednesday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy commented on his phone call with his American counterpart. According to Zelenskyy, the two officials discussed the U.S. potentially taking control of the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power plant and conditions for a ceasefire.
There was a question about the nuclear power plant. There was no question about the network of nuclear power plants. We spoke exclusively about the plant that is under temporary occupation. It is in danger because Russia is controlling it with weapons, and it's not working because Russia has absolutely illegally held it and occupied it. President Trump asked me if there was a possibility that America could rebuild it, and I told him yes, if we can modernize it, invest money and so on, we are ready to discuss it with you. But we only talked about one plant, which is under Russian occupation. Vladimir Putin doesn't want us to leave even one of our soldiers in the Kursk region. He doesn't want a ceasefire as long as our troops are in the Kursk region. I am absolutely sure of this. Putin has been telling everyone all these years that Ukraine does not want the war to end, that Ukraine is disrupting a potential ceasefire, that Ukraine is the one not wanting this war to end. What Ukraine has demonstrated today is that Ukraine wants the war to end. Ukraine is stronger than he thinks, that Ukraine is ready for a full ceasefire without any conditions.
The White House is saying that a ceasefire in Ukraine has never been closer. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt made the statement while referencing an official report from U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The announcement came after a phone call on Wednesday between U.S. President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. The two leaders reportedly discussed progress on a ceasefire agreement, U.S. aid to Kyiv, and other key issues expected to shape up the upcoming peace talks in Jeddah on March 23rd.
President Trump fully briefed President Zelenskyy on his conversation with Putin and the key issues discussed. They reviewed the situation in Kursk and agreed to share information closely between their defense staffs as the battlefield situation evolved. President Zelenskyy asked for additional air defense systems to protect his civilians, particularly Patriot missile systems, and President Trump agreed to work with him to find what was available, particularly in Europe. The two leaders also agreed on a partial ceasefire against energy. Technical teams will meet in Saudi Arabia in the coming days to discuss broadening the ceasefire to the Black Sea on the way to a full ceasefire. They agreed all parties must continue the effort to make a ceasefire work. The presidents noted the positive work of their advisors and representatives, especially Secretary Rubio, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, Special Envoy Kellogg, and others. The presidents instructed their teams to move ahead with the technical issues related to implementing and broadening the partial ceasefire. The presidents instructed their advisors and representatives to carry out this work as quickly as possible.
EU leaders are convening in Brussels to discuss matters of competitiveness and defense amid the ongoing war in Ukraine. The agenda of the meeting, apart from Ukraine, includes the bloc's multi-annual financial framework, migration, and recent developments in the Middle East. The officials gathered in the Belgian capital will discuss strategies to enhance Europe's strategic autonomy and resilience in the face of various geopolitical challenges. Key focus areas include energy policy and savings and investment union program, as well as industrial innovation and decarbonization. Among the proposals submitted ahead of the summit is the creation, retention, and recognition of skills necessary for Europe's constantly evolving industrial demands. In an important gesture, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres will join the EU leaders for a working lunch.
It was made possible also thanks to the efforts of Poland, especially when it comes to border security. As you know, pressing the matter took some time. I had to convince a number of our European partners that the security of Europe, NATO and the whole continent depends on the security of the border between Europe and Russia and Belarus.
Those were the words of Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk ahead of the meeting. The European Commissioner for Defense was full of praise for Poland's defensive architecture, telling TVP World in Brussels that the East Shield is not only important for that country, but also for the Baltics and Finland. The comments came after he handed down his white paper on defense, which aims to identify major issues impacting Europe's security.
The European Commissioner for Defence, Andris Kubilius, praised Poland's eastern border shield and said that Poland, as well as other countries in the neighbourhood of Ukraine, are facing the biggest security issue impacting Europe. This is Russian aggression. Now, the comments came outside the Berlaymont, where I'm reporting from, following a press conference where that leader handed down his white paper on defence. Now, for the past 100 days, that official has been travelling across the EU, speaking to stakeholders about their biggest issues facing the security architecture. He laid it all bare in a 27-page report which identifies 7 major pillars that need to be addressed. This includes regulatory red tape to meeting industry needs. But the report also included a spotlight to Poland's eastern shield. Now, that commissioner said in his report that this was a noteworthy project. We asked him about this outside the European Commission. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
The white paper speaks about so-called defense projects of common European interest, and among them there is clear language about so-called northeastern border shield. So we shall develop further, this project as an option for member states to agree, perhaps in June during EUCO. But this is one of those, very important strategic projects, which is important, of course, for Poland, but also for Baltic states, for Finland, for other countries which are bordering with aggressive Russia.
Now, the white paper on defence is meant to complement the European Union's €800 billion push to rearm the bloc. Now, the European Commission is behind this proposal. The major instrument there is a €150 billion investment package. But we heard today that major manufacturing heavy hitters such as the UK, the US and Turkey are not allowed to participate as part of the program. We also know that all member states are invited to trigger their national escape clauses. And let's take a listen to what the EU's top foreign policy boss had to say regarding this.
The international order is undergoing changes of a magnitude not seen since 1945. This is a pivotal moment for European security. It is a pivotal moment for action. Yes, that the needs of additional funding are massive. The proposals we have adopted today are also essential. But for all the important discussions needed on increasing defence spending, the value we add by working together is priceless.
Now, the Rearm Europe plan, as well as the white paper on defence, should be music to the ears of the Secretary-General Mark Rutte of NATO. Now, that leader for months has been calling on those NATO allies to meet that 2% funding benchmark as part of the NATO agreement. We're expecting that number to scale up, and we now know that by the EU announcing these policy instruments, that those alliance members will be more likely to do so. Angela Skujins from Brussels for TVP World.
Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs Radosław Sikorski is on a state visit to the United Kingdom. In London, Sikorski will meet with his British counterpart David Lammy and later make an appearance at Oxford University. Sikorski and Lammy will discuss the latest US-Ukraine talks and the future of support for Kyiv. The agenda also includes the upcoming summit of the largest European nations and the United Kingdom in Madrid. During his trip, Radosław Sikorski will also speak at the Royal College of Defence Studies about European security and later visit Oxford University's Pembroke College, where he himself studied in the 1980s. Poland is discussing ways of joining forces with other EU nations and the United Kingdom to drive up defense production. In an interview for the Financial Times, the Polish Finance Minister Andrzej Domański said Europe must take more responsibility for its own security. Domański went on to say that he had already discussed new tools for defense spending with UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves on Wednesday. Domański said that Poland, which currently holds the rotating EU presidency, had invited the British minister to a European finance ministers meeting in Warsaw next month. Poland, which is NATO's top defense spender, has been calling on its EU European partners to increase their respective defense spending. The French army aims to double its number of paid reservists by 2030, in line with similar efforts across Europe. Poland, for instance, plans to grow its military reserve from around 200,000 to 500,000 troops. To join France's operational reserve, candidates must be French citizens aged 17 to 72, in good physical condition and with no criminal record. Reservists typically serve about 30 days per year for up to 5 years. France currently has 84,000 reservists and plans to increase that number to 160,000 by 2030. Major protests have erupted in Turkey after authorities detained Ekrem İmamoğlu, the mayor of Istanbul and the biggest political rival of the Turkish president. Turkish law enforcement arrested the politician on Wednesday, just days before İmamoğlu was due to be tapped as a presidential candidate. Protesters have taken to the streets, with crowds chanting anti-government slogans in a display of anger Turkey has not seen in years. As the demonstrators continued, reports surfaced of clashes between protesters and police, which used pepper spray to disperse crowds outside of the Istanbul University. Prosecutors accused the mayor of Istanbul of corruption and aiding a terrorist group, calling him the leader of a criminal organization. As part of the investigation, the police also detained 100 people, including politicians, journalists, and entrepreneurs. The Israeli military has said that its forces have resumed ground operations in the central and southern parts of the Gaza Strip. Wednesday marked the second day of renewed airstrikes on Gaza, which, according to local health workers, have killed more than 400 Palestinians. The ground operations began a day after one of the deadliest episodes of fighting since the beginning of the conflict in October of 2023. The Israeli military said its operations extended Israel's control over the Netzarim corridor and created a buffer zone between the north and south of the Gaza Strip. In response, the Palestinian militant group Hamas claimed the ground operation was, quote, a new and dangerous violation of the 2-month-old ceasefire agreement. In a statement, Hamas reaffirmed its commitment to the deal and called on mediators to, quote, assume their responsibilities. Additionally, several missiles were launched overnight from Yemen, triggering air raid sirens across Israel. And so this would be all for now. Thank you so much for joining, and please do stay tuned here on TVP World. We're back in just a moment with more news and features.